Snotius, the great warlord of Snotantinople, found himself in a very difficult predicament. To the south was the grand metropolis of Big Town. To the north was the mysterious military facility surrounded by weird stuff and mutants. A Hume flyboy from the south scouted out the greenskin positions in Mega Humeopolis, and the military base likely knew of the glorious empire of Snotopia after 4 snotlings were killed attempting to infiltrate the Hume base. An enemy on both sides. Snotius placed an enormous finger up his equally enormous nose in thought. Only the cunning of Mork could save him now. If the Humies fell on him in great numbers, he would have little chance of withstanding their full might. So, what to do? There were other concerns as well. The mighty road that was to be built uniting the various settlements of Snotopia was greatly delayed, and DeBrain had yet to complete whatever secret project he was working on. Oh, Snotius knew better than to interrupt a mad genius in his work. First things first, the immediate threat needed to be dealt with. The Humies from the weird place up north were likely to go snooping around in the woods, looking for the greenskins. Snotius was all for a fight, but he had no interest in a fair fight, let alone a fight where he and his boys were at a distinct disadvantage. It was then that Snotius had an idea. What if the Humies were made to believe that they destroyed Snotopia? Snotius's finger was nearly touching his brain with how far it was shoved up his nose, as he thought his most cunning of thoughts. What if a contingent of snotlings, led by a grot, set up a false base? What if they made the Humies think they found a fledgling greenskin settlement? What if the Humies destroyed that settlement and believed they eliminated the threat? Oh, it just might work. Snotlings were bountiful. Snotius could simply grab any of them that were milling about and had nothing much to do. But who would lead them? Who was expendable? Stinky would have been Snotius's first choice, but he wasn't available. After some thought, Snotius settled on Punchin' a snotling who had mutated and become grot-sized and grot-brained. He had survived a long time, despite being in some dangerous fights. Perhaps he might even find a way to survive this scrap. So Snotius sent him off into the woods north of Byzantium to set up a false settlement for the Humies to find and destroy. It was a sacrifice that Snotius was willing to make. As they were sent off to their doom, Snotius turned his attention to the road project. That needed to be finished. Travel by river was far too slow, and he needed to be able to move material and boys between the settlements quickly. A half-hour drive was far preferable to a full day of paddling a raft down the river. But the work had been bogged down by a lack of enthusiasm by the orcs. They were meant to be the muscle that got the trees cleared and hauled out of the way. But they were surly and unwilling to do what they believed to be grot work. Even when Snotius bashed some heads and cowed the orcs into working, they still only worked grudgingly and with little effort. A solution had to be found. 2 grots had been contemplating the problem, Defurious and Dexter, and they had their own notions about how to go about doing it. Defurious was impatient. Ever since he drove his first truck, he had been itching to be a proper grot truck driver, flying down the road loaded with boys and gubbins, shouting encouragement. He was enthusiastic in his effort to motivate the boys, though he wasn't being very coherent.
We're gonna ride! We're gonna go fast! And then we're gonna... Wah!
Well, his words weren't clear, but his raw enthusiasm was as undeniable as it was infectious. Soon all of the grots and snots were redoubling their efforts, equally eager to be going fast. The orcs were a little swayed, but they were still not thrilled with the prospect of work. Dexter, a relatively new grot, had an idea.
You know, all of this doesn't have to be boring. You know the Humies in Mega Humiopolis have chain choppers. We ain't fighting Humies right now. But you could fight the trees! Hack them all down! Make the big road!
With DeFurious's enthusiasm and the power of Dexter's suggestion, the orcs seized chainsaws and took to their work with more vigor, getting the construction of the road system back on track. By day's end, a rough path had been clear-cut. It was not a clear paved road, but the trucks could now use it. With a simple rough path cut through the woods, now it was time for Punch and Bag to fool the Humies into destroying a false settlement. Punch and Bag and his contingent marched into the woods north of Byzantium. Fortunately, they were not harassed by any of the local wildlife. Punch and Bag was the only one properly armed, wielding a las gun, while the snotlings were armed with sticks, stones, bows, knives, simple spears, and anything they could get their little mitts on. The crew found a likely spot to make their stand, an old fallen hollow tree. They began digging trenches around this central feature, and also began creating orc-shaped figures out of wood, sticks, and bark, setting them up behind the log, complete with drawn-on tusks, frowny faces, and angry eyes. Small pits were then dug and filled with punji sticks and covered over, and they were set all around the makeshift fort. A few of the snotlings buried angry, biting squigs in the pit as well. The crew worked for as long as they could, trying to get it all prepared before the Humies came snooping around. To finish off the mighty bastion that Punching Bag proudly named Decoy, a sign was set out front that read, "Welcome to Decoy. All of the greenskins definitely live here." Fortunately, it was written in Orc, and the Humies wouldn't likely understand their primitive glyphs and sniff out the deception. When the work was finally finished, the snotlings all lay about their trenchworks, exhausted from the trek and the work. Punch and Bag didn't even rouse them. They needed their strength for when the Humies came around. Unfortunately, it was not long before Punch and Bag spotted Humie shapes in the distance, picking their way through the woods. Now, Decoy was intended to be a large and obvious distraction. But given that it was essentially a pile of sticks and a few snotling-sized trenches, it was not initially noticed by the patrol. As they drew nearer, Punch and Bag carefully counted them up.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Many.
Of course, by Humie reckoning, there were 9 regular infantrymen and 1 bearing a flamer. Their eyes scanned the area, but still they did not register the existence of Decoy as they began to wander into the pit traps. One Humie cried out in surprise and pain as his foot gave way and several sharpened sticks jabbed into his boot. The leather was thick, so they didn't penetrate. But more than a few of the sticks stabbed into his shin, causing great pain. Another Humie got it much worse, when he stepped into a squig trap, and the powerful jaws of the creature easily chomped through his boot and took a large piece of his foot. Shouts of surprise and alarm arose from the Humies as they went on high alert. The Humie with the missing foot fired into the pit, dispatching the angry squig before stumbling backwards in pain. The rest of the Humies advanced, taking care to watch their step. At this moment, all of Decoy sprang to life as a hail of rocks and tiny arrows rained down upon the Humies. Punch and Bag was a bit overexcited to start the ambush, and his first shot sailed well over the heads of the patrol. The Snotlings, however, managed to completely overwhelm the lead Humie, peppering him with arrows and tiny spears like a pincushion. A few even surged out of their trenches and began to stab and smash him with their tiny implements of destruction. Surprised by the ferocity of the tiny greenskins, the Humies opened fire with their las guns, blasting into the crude fortifications. The Snotlings were difficult to see, and they were relatively small targets. But the first volley was still powerful and took 5 of them. One of the Humies shouted and pointed a finger at Punch and Bag, who was operating the lone lasgun behind the fallen tree. He was likely going to be target number 1. Punch and Bag had only a brief moment to act before he started taking fire. He saw the large burner tank on the back of one of the Humies. That would need to be his target. If that Humie got any closer, all of Decoy would go up in flames in one big burst. But before Punch and Bag could even line up his shot, a las blast tore through his shoulder and took his left arm clean off. Another blast hit him squarely in the abdomen. Barely hanging on to life, Punch and Bag managed to get a grip on his las gun, and using the stump to guide his aim, pointed at the burner.
For Snottius! For Snottantanople! Whoa!
With that, the tiny grotling opened fire on the burner. He only managed 2 shots before another las blast sent his body tumbling lifelessly into the trench behind him. One of those shots found its mark and struck the burner pack on the Humie, causing him to burst into flames, quickly being consumed by the fire. The other Humies quickly advanced to dispose of the remaining defenders of Decoy. With their boss dead, it was the most common thing in the galaxy for Snotlings to flee and hide. But there was something inside them that made the rest of the Snotlings hold their ground. 2 more Snotlings took up the lasgun of their fallen boss and intended to make the Humies fight for every inch of ground. Swarm Boss and Punch and Bag too took up the weapon of their fallen leader and began firing into the Humies. Now the Humies were getting their heads on straight, and now were reacting properly to the ambush. Many of them took cover to avoid the las blasts and the tiny projectiles from the Snotlings. The first Humie to get swarmed was unlucky, but the rest were well-trained and well-equipped soldiers. Their flak armor was more than enough to handle the tiny primitive weapons of the Snots. But they took careful aim, and the shots fired by Swarm Boss and Punch and Bag 2 struck home, and another Humie fell to the ground. A cheer went up from the 2 Snotlings, just before another volley took them out as well. A volley blasted through the ranks of the tiny fortification, killing more Snotlings until they were down to nearly half strength, only 11 still standing. Again, the tiny greenskins found the bravery to stand and fight in spite of their inborn cowardly natures. They did not flee. More Snotlings swarmed forward to try to seize their only real weapon. One, who named himself Gunner in the heat of battle, took up the fallen lasgun. With a great feat of strength, for he was only a snotling, he leaned the lasgun on the log and took another shot at one of the Humies, striking one that was attempting to move forward and clear the snots left in the trenches. Cheers again went up from the survivors as one more Humie went down. But the victory was short-lived. The Humies surrounded the tiny fortress as one shot took out Gunner. That moment, the snotling hit the dirt. The Humies rushed the little outpost, ruthlessly gunning down the remaining snots in their trenches. During this slaughter, the snotlings still simply would not break. They would not surrender. They would not flee. It was down to the final 3 snotlings, as they died attempting to lift the looted lasgun one last time. But they were shot down where they stood before they could even lift it. The battle scarcely lasted a few minutes, but Punchin' Bag and his snots exacted a heavy toll on the Humies. Back to the Humie base they limped, right after setting a fire to Decoy to cleanse it of spores. Those greenskins had sacrificed everything for the smallest deception, the slightest delay, so that maybe, just maybe, Snotopia would be able to grow the numbers to fight both Big Town and Weird Fort.
No man do they call me, my mother and my father, and all my comrades as well. Thank you all for listening to the latest episode of Growing the Tribe. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give a like and a comment so that you too can die gloriously in a last stand conceived by strangers on the internet. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so in order to hear more of my stories about tiny green critters earning their names just before dying. If you would like to support me, links to my Patreon, my Teespring, and my PayPal are down below in the description. And finally, if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, you can click on the Growing the Tribe playlist and watch from the very beginning of the story. The link should be appearing on the screen right now. Thank you all once again for listening. No Man out.